Welcome to another edition of the DLF Dynasty podcast with me, Matt Price, and Ryan McDowell. I'm Dan Myler. Fellas, how we doing? We're getting going on this rookie cash, stash, and trash series that we do every year. And of course, there was some big news over the weekend that we have to cover. But before we get to any of that, let's see how you're doing. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. I'm glad we got this news. It was starting to be a little quiet around the league, and this shakes things up a little bit, even though it was kind of expected at this point.
Yeah, and maybe an expected landing spot, but we can get to that in a minute. Matt, how's it going, bud?
It's good. It was good to get some news today to break up some staleness, I guess. And, the next round, I think, of rookie drafts are starting to happen. I'm just kicking off red list auctions, and KS5 is rolling. So, we're still finding things to do at this point in the offseason. Yeah,
having a lot of fun with all that stuff. Before we get into the main topic, Matt, I saw some tweets from you over the weekend talking about how maybe zookeeping isn't all of your future. What are we going to do about that Twitter handle and everything your I guess your name on Twitter?
Yeah, I guess it'll have to be, if it comes to fruition, it'll have to be the ex-zookeeper or something. I don't know. Yeah, it's just, it's a very physical job and starting to get to me. Had shoulder surgery, back hurts, knees hurt. So kind of want to, it's almost like a football player that wants to retire early before they're broken and can enjoy the rest of their life. Sure. Right. So still love the job, but it's looking like it might be time to at least think about moving out.
A lot more comfortable in that podcasting chair, huh?
Yeah.
A lot more fun than most days, I would assume. Let's get to some of the big news that happened, or I guess the big news that happened. Julio Jones reportedly traded to the Titans, package of picks, kind of swap back and forth, a second and a fourth for Julio and a sixth is the last thing I heard, Ryan. General thoughts, we are going to cover both of these teams, actually. We're covering the AFC and the NFC South, but general thoughts on the Julio Jones trade. What does it do, Ryan, for his value specifically?
I think his value really kind of holds steady when we're talking Dynasty. Again, he's already lost quite a bit of value over the last year or so, not only because of his age, but also the injuries that he dealt with last year. So while we might not like the Tennessee offense in general as much as the Atlanta offense for fantasy purposes, I think his value basically holds steady. Obviously, it's good news for Ryan Tannehill. And then, the big question is, what does this do for A.J. Brown and for Derrick Henry? Those are the two big pieces involved. But helping Tannehill, helping Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, I think those are pretty obvious.
Yeah, the pretty obvious winners out of the deal. Matt, your thoughts on those other weapons that are in Tennessee that Ryan just mentioned? The running game, they're a run-first team. Now another alpha receiver to go along with A.J. Brown. Does it hurt A.J. Brown at all in the short term? And also with Derrick Henry running the football in the middle of that defense, how does that really affect him for fantasy purposes?
I mean, I think for Henry, if he can overcome the high touch numbers he's had over the past couple of seasons and stay healthy, like it just opens up things even more, you would think, right? There's even more, you have to pay even more respect to the passing game. So, as much as we keep wanting to say sell Henry high and as difficult that is based on his age and his usage, at this point, it just seems like you have to ride him out, and he's going to continue to produce until he doesn't, right? And then for the other weapons, Josh Reynolds is probably gone, not gone, but, out of our minds for fantasy. Daz Newsome, kind of came on as a little bit of a sleeper the last few weeks. I think that's done. This is just really a funnel offense. I think it's nice for fantasy because we're going to be able to predict all the targets are going to go to Julio and to A.J. Brown. It probably caps A.J. Brown's upside a little bit in the short term, I guess, like maybe the top end. But I think they're both of these guys, just because they're going to be the sole target getters in the passing offense, they're both going to be over 120 targets. So, I think both can probably coexist. You might have a little bit of a frustration where one, goes off on 1 week and they kind of flip flop between who's going to produce each week in our lineups. But, over the course of the season, it should even out, I think. And so it's good for all three of those pieces, I think.
Yeah, I really feel like it's good for everybody in Tennessee as well, especially Tannehill, who Ryan mentioned. There's so much more firepower in an offense that was already doing really well. I spent just a couple minutes on Twitter looking at some reaction and saw that Corey Davis, the comps and things like that, how he struggled in that offense and how that would matter for Julio. And I just rolled my eyes and turned Twitter off, and that's why I can't spend any time there. Let's talk about this Tennessee Titans offense. I guess their draft, really. That's where we're going to start the rookie cash stash and trash segment of the show. We did the AFC and NFC East last week, so if you missed it, go check that out. This week, it's the AFC and NFC South, and it starts in Tennessee. They didn't address those skill positions until day 3, fellas, and a couple wide receivers, Des Fitzpatrick, Racey McMath in 4th and 6th round. Matt, when it comes to these receivers, are we just kind of moving past them and sliding them over into that trash pile, or is there any upside in the long term with these guys?
I think I said Daz Newsome. I meant Des Fitzpatrick.
Sure.
Anyway, yeah, those are the two. I think they're just future roster cloggers at this point. I guess if Julio is only a 1-year rental in Tennessee and he moves on, then maybe you have something a little bit down the line with those guys. But if Julio is going to stick around for 2 years or more, then those guys are just, I think, going to be afterthoughts. So I guess we'll call them trash for me at this point.
Ryan, the reason I threw it to Matt first is so he could be the first one to call out trash, because he gets you so often for doing it. Your thought?
I think I would actually have both of these guys in the stash category, even with the addition of Julio Jones. I mean, again, thinking more long term, I do like Fitzpatrick. Obviously, they invested a pretty valuable pick, one of the first picks on day 3 in Des Fitzpatrick. And then McMath, the kid from LSU, is just that speed guy, which, obviously both Julio Jones and AJ Brown are well-rounded receivers, can do pretty much anything that they're asked to do. But they're not necessarily thought of as that traditional deep threat type player. And that's what McMath is. So of course, both of these guys as day 3 picks have long roads to go and a lot to overcome. But if we're talking really big rosters, 30 players plus, I'd try to stash them both.
Yeah, I'm gonna side on this one. It feels like they're most likely to be on your waiver wire within probably 18 months or so by the time we're drafting 2 years from now, even in those bigger leagues. So I do agree that there is a little bit of upside. I don't know if the Julio trade really matters for me when it comes to how to look at these guys or what lens to look at these guys through. It's there's certainly a chance in an offense that has produced some playmakers, but I'm just not looking at them as guys I want to build around. They're not necessarily guys that are being drafted in most rookie drafts right now either. So I guess in those really deep leagues like Ryan's talking about, they are roster worthy at the end of a bench. Let's jump over to Indianapolis, guys, with the Colts, another team that waited until day 3, Ryan, to jump into those skill position players. They added tight end Kylin Granson, quarterback Sam Ehlinger, and wide receiver Mike Strachan. I'm not real familiar with him. You got any? What are your thoughts on these 3? Is there any chance that these guys are quality stashes in the long haul?
I think Granson is for sure. We've already heard a little bit out of him and about him from rookie OTAs, and obviously have to be careful about the hype that comes from those things. But certainly encouraging. You think about the depth chart: Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox in front of him. Doyle, it kind of just feels like the end is near for him, unfortunately. And while Mo Alley Cox was kind of impressive at times this year, I really like what the Colts have given us at tight end over the years, turning these, kind of no-name guys into something fantasy relevant. So we'll see if Granson can be the next in that line, but I like the opportunity for him. The Ehlinger pick just did not make sense at all for me. They invested so much into the Carson Wentz trade. They used a pretty valuable pick on Jacob Eason a year ago. And even though we're talking about a sixth rounder, the end of the sixth round, I just don't understand why they drafted Sam Ehlinger at all. I think Ehlinger and Strachan. I'm not sure of the pronunciation either there, Dan. I wouldn't even bother with those guys. Trash, Matt. They're trash.
Yeah, they're all trash for me. I'm going to go ahead and side with Mo Alley-Cox over Kylin Granson. I mean, who knows, right? But fourth round isn't the worst draft capital for a tight end. But I'm not going to be spending even a single dollar in an auction league on any of these guys.
Yeah, I'm not really either. It's interesting. Granson and Ehlinger were picked in 2 of the most recent rookie drafts on DLF. Both of them very late. I don't even think in a super flex league with big rosters, a lot of people are going after Sam Ehlinger. He had a really nice career at Texas, but those skills don't appear to transfer to a playmaking starter in the NFL. So I think most of us are just overlooking this entire class in Indianapolis. I do think Granson has a little bit of upside, though. I wasn't super familiar with him until after the draft, and then maybe after those little blurbs came out about Granson coming out of that camp, Ryan, got a little more familiar with him, and there might be a little something there. So in those tight end premium leagues where you got room for multiple tight ends on your bench, he's a guy worth considering late, I think. How about the Houston Texans? They need a lot of help. They didn't help themselves out all that well, though. They had 2 third-round picks that, they traded all those picks away, and then they finally get on the clock and they pick a quarterback, Ryan. They go with Davis Mills out of Stanford in the 3rd round. Then later in the same round, Nico Collins, the wide receiver out of Michigan. So perhaps a chance to get on the field for him. And then all the way down in round 5, they go with tight end Brevin Jordan, who some dynasty players out there are pretty excited about out of Miami. So this group, Ryan, is there who's the most likely to be at least roster worthy, at least a stash player in the future?
It's so easy to criticize everything we see from the Texans recently. Just using that first pick, even though it's in the 3rd round, on Davis Mills doesn't make a ton of sense. Even if we assume one way or another that Deshaun Watson is not going to be there, you think they just wait until next year to figure out the quarterback position. But at the same time, if Davis Mills gets some playing time this year, and I would expect that he would, if he hits, then they've struck gold in the 3rd round. So I guess, but it ultimately it feels like probably a wasted pick from the standpoint of what we're doing here today, cash, stash, or trash. I actually see a path for him to be a cash player because I do think he's going to play this year. Even in super flex leagues, he's being drafted in the 3rd round as the quarterback 8 in rookie drafts. These are actual rookie drafts from my fantasy league. So I think there's a really good chance for some nice return on that investment. And I would say the same thing with Nico Collins. So I think they're both going to gain value. I don't know if they're going to gain enough value to be able to, sell them for a future second or something like that. But that would be my plan. So I would call those both kind of cash players with an asterisk.
And you better splash around in the Brevin Jordan waters here. How are we feeling about his upside, Ryan?
No, he's trash.
Thank you.
That's an easy one.
We got him out of it. We got it out of him, Matt. Matt, specifically with Davis Mills, you sharing a brain with Ryan on this? You thinking that he could be a cash player because of the short-term upside in Houston for playing time?
Yeah, exactly. You have to assume that Tyrod is probably going to start off the season as a starter, presuming that, Watson isn't going to play. But as the Texans continue to drift farther and farther away from playoffs, you have to think they're at least going to give Davis Mills a shot. So definitely room for cashing in year 1. Nico Collins, I think, is a stash. I think he uses his size well for a big receiver, but I don't think he's fast. And I'm not sure about his separation in the NFL. So we'll see there, but there's certainly, opportunity in the passing offense should there be a passing offense that we care about. And I kind of feel the same way about Brevin Jordan. I know you guys hated him pre-draft, and I was a little bit higher. And I know the tight ends in Houston, they bring in a new one every single year. It was, Kahali Waring and Darren Fells and, Jordan Akins and Jordan Thomas, I think, right? So he's probably just going to end up again in that big glop, but he is athletic enough to separate if he has a quarterback that is going to throw him the ball. So I'm going to call him and Collins both stashes and Davis Mills a potential cash. And I did not think that was going to happen when I looked at the Houston Texans draft class.
Yeah, I didn't think so either, but I thought maybe I would be the only one that would call him cash for all the reasons that you all mentioned. You mentioned, Ryan, that maybe that was a wasted pick, and I completely agree with you, especially when you consider all the rosters in the league. It's pretty easy to say that Houston has the least amount of talent, probably most likely to have a very high draft pick next year. And even if this Deshaun Watson thing doesn't work out in the team's favor and Watson ends up staying away from the team for multiple weeks or potentially even the entire season, you would think that they would want to readdress that position next year, a year from now, when they were picking so high. I think the likelihood of wasting their first pick in the draft and a high third round pick is so high that, finding an offensive lineman or another skill position player would have been a better way to spend that pick. But we'll see how that plays out. Either way, you mentioned the value that Mills is bringing in those Superflex draft and auctions. I'd be scouring that market for sure. There's the opportunity to get some playing time this year. And as we've seen with so many quarterbacks in the past, a few good games can suddenly put them in the marketplace and become a player that you can trade for a future draft pick or future auction dollars, anything like that. There's the potential. And when you're only giving up a third round rookie pick or a few auction bucks, there's just so much upside in that. Quickly on Nico Collins, I was a Collins fan coming out of Michigan, and I like the landing spot for obvious reasons because there should be opportunities on the outside. When you think about the talent that's on that roster at receiver, I think most people think of Brandon Cooks right away and think of him as being an interior option, a guy that can work in the slot but work on the outside as well. After that, Randall Cobb's probably the next name, and he's going to work out of the slot almost exclusively. So that leaves a little bit of an opportunity for Collins, who's a big body receiver and a guy who could be a playmaker on the perimeter and in the red zone. So there's a chance for Collins. I'm going to be watching him closely. Another guy that's going very late in rookie drafts. So a guy that we can get in on. I'm going to call him cash as well because of those opportunities I see for him. Jordan, we're going to throw him in the trash pile. No doubt. The last team in the AFC South we should talk about is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And there's so much talent that was added to this team, Matt, with Trevor Lawrence in the first round and Travis Etienne in the first round. I don't know if there's a dynasty player out there that isn't going to call both of those guys cash.
Yeah, these are probably the two most obvious ones we'll talk about in this entire show, I assume, outside of one other player. But yeah, these two are easily cash. Etienne's the running back one for me. Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback one, of course. Both first rounders in pretty much every format you can think of in Dynasty.
Ryan, is there anything else to say? Really, they're cash players. Everybody wants them on their rosters, right?
Absolutely, both cash players for sure.
Beyond that, in the 5th and 6th round, they did add a couple of weapons. Tight end Luke Farrell out of Ohio State, who isn't known as a great downfield pass catcher. And then Jalen Camp out of Georgia Tech, the wide receiver in the 6th round. Any upside here, Ryan?
Yeah, I like Camp a little. He's another player that has got some positive reviews coming out of camp. But the depth chart is obviously tough when it comes to competition. Chark and Chenault. And then they also bring in Marvin Jones. I still am kind of hanging on to my Colin Johnson shares from last year. So no matter what you think of Jalen Camp, it's tough to see him finding a path to really any serious playing time. So he's another one of those deep stash guys for me, 30, 35 man rosters. Maybe you find a spot for him. Outside of that, probably not. And Farrell, I think, is probably just that blocking tight end. Although they need something there. It's not Tim Tebow.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to be anyway. Matt, what about you? Any love for any of these guys at the end of the draft for the Jags?
Yeah, I like stashing Camp. It's obviously a crowded wide receiver depth chart, but he's got some nice size that, most of the other receivers outside of DJ Chark and Chenault don't necessarily offer. But he's so hard to like project to the next level as he played in that triple option system where they don't really throw the ball very much at all. So I think like 300 yards or something in his final season. So tough to judge from a prospect standpoint, but you like the size and obviously the fit with quarterback of the future.
They're really looking to put some weapons in that offense for Lawrence. So, I think they're going to give a lot of opportunities to all the guys they added this offseason, not to mention the guys that they held over from last year's roster, which included a couple of playmakers for sure, and Chenault and of course, DJ Chark. So, I think luckily we have a preseason this year, or should have a preseason. We'll get to see some of these types of names. And if he makes an impact in the preseason, he could be a guy that would be moving up. So he's got that little asterisk next to his name on my rookie draft board for my late rookie drafts, a guy I'll be watching in the preseason for sure. But the main headlines of this class, of course, are Lawrence and Etienne for the Jags, both cash players. We should jump over to the NFC South, guys, and we might as well start with the New Orleans Saints, because even though they didn't jump into the skill position players till later on in the draft, when they did, they grabbed a quarterback. It's Ian Book out of Notre Dame, a guy that, honestly, Matt, I kind of like him. If you watched him at Notre Dame, he's got leadership. He's got a decent arm. He's got a little bit of that quarterback savvy that seems almost like arrogance or confidence, whatever way you want to say it. I like the Ian Book a little bit, and he's a guy that I've been keeping an eye on in my rookie auctions and rookie drafts, because you can get him for next to nothing, and he landed with a coach that works well with quarterbacks and on a team that is sure to have opportunities for quarterbacks, if not this year, then potentially next season. What are your thoughts on Book? Is he a cash, stash, or trash player for you?
I mean, he's a little bit athletic, so he has a little bit of that to his game, but he seems an extremely inaccurate quarterback to me, just from the few games that I watched and have read about. So I'm not really super interested in it, but you can't deny the opportunity could be there should Jameis implode. And whatever they decide to do with Taysom Hill, I don't think he's ever going to be the full-time starter. So, if Jameis implodes, maybe he gets a couple of games this season just to see what he can do, and anything can happen at that point. And then next season, like you said, given a Jameis implosion, they're going to be looking for a quarterback. So if he were to work out, then, maybe you have something. But in general, he's, in a super flex format, he's that, the end of the, like you said, the end of the draft, 4th, 5th round kind of dark throw for me. I wouldn't you spend even a 3rd round on him.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. That's what I was talking about, really. If you're at the end of the 4th round in a Superflex rookie draft and you want to add some depth at quarterback, especially if you can add a rookie and put him on your practice squad or taxi squad, that's the kind of stash he is. He's a low-end stash for sure. Ryan, Ian Book, also they added in the 7th round Kawaan Baker out of South Alabama, the wide receiver. Any thoughts on these two guys?
Yeah, I think Book on any other team probably would fall in that trash category for me. But with the Saints, not only the coaching staff and the situation there, but obviously the potential for playing time for really any quarterback on that roster, he has to at least move into that stash category. You guys called him a target in the late 4th round. That's exactly where he is being drafted, 45th overall. And again, that's in Superflex leagues, obviously going even much later than that, or not being drafted at all in one quarterback leagues. As far as Baker, again, not a player I know a ton about, but this team has to figure out something at wide receiver. They just keep running it back with, Traquan Smith and these same old guys behind Michael Thomas. And even had Emmanuel Sanders last year, and now he's gone. So you just think they're going to somebody is going to have to emerge at some point. Maybe we should be paying attention to Baker at the very end of our drafts as well.
Yeah, another guy that would be worth monitoring throughout the offseason and into the preseason. We'll see how things shake out. He wasn't really a guy that I knew a whole lot about either, but playing at a smaller school at South Alabama. The only thing I know about South Alabama is they like to run that vertical offense. And so if you turn on Kawaan Baker highlights from his college days, you're going to see a lot of over the top and big play, and then that underneath passing game, and look for big yardage after the catch. So maybe they unlocked something there that makes him, again, one of those real, if you're making a long list of stashes, he's towards the bottom of that list of stashes, but a guy that we should be monitoring. How about the Super Bowl champs? Let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They put a succession plan into place in the second round, late in the second round. They take Kyle Trask out of Florida. Let's talk about him specifically first, Ryan, because there was a lot to say when it came to who was going to be that next quarterback taken in the NFL draft. And we all waited to hear the second name. And then with the last pick in the second round, it was Trask, and he did go to Tampa Bay to play behind Tom Brady, who I'm sure still has multiple years left to go. But Kyle Trask, if you're thinking about a stash quarterback, especially in those superflex leagues, he has to be the poster boy for it right now.
Yeah, 100%. Even if he doesn't play at all this year, and looking at their depth chart, they do have a couple fairly reliable veterans, Blaine Gabbert, Ryan Griffin. So, I mean, there's a pretty good chance we don't see Trask on the field at all this year, barring something really going wrong. But I think you're totally right. He's the ideal stash player, especially in those super flex leagues. But I kind of feel like I've learned my lesson. I've spent too much time trying to figure out who Tom Brady's successor is going to be. I've been doing this for 10 years now, it feels like, telling people to sell Brady because he was too old. And those guys haven't really worked out yet. Ryan Mallett and guys like that. So, you know, of course, Trask, we would assume, is going to get his shot, but it might be 2022 or even after that.
Matt, what are your thoughts on Trask? He's got the big arm and got a lot of the characteristics that we like in an NFL quarterback, but lacks a lot of the athleticism that we really like to see. It's certainly going to be a year, maybe more than that, before we see him on the field. Are you willing to put him on your rosters in standard size superflex leagues and wait for his opportunity?
I think the move with Trask, if I'm going to draft him, is to take him in that third round or third, into the third, hopefully somewhere in that range. And then next season, before we know 100% for sure that Brady is coming back again, which he probably is, but before we have that concrete information, that's when I want to look to flip Trask. If you can move from the third to a second, something like that, you're not going to make a huge profit on this kind of move. But that would be my go-to with Trask. I don't think I'm going to hold him for 2 years unless I just have a big roster that can handle that, because like Ryan said, you just don't know when Brady is going to retire. So I'd like to capitalize on a flip if I'm going to invest anything in Trask.
I really like that advice. I mean, we've got these three guys being drafted within 4 picks of each other. Kylin Mond, who we have not talked about in this series yet, is 26th overall. Trask is 27. Davis Mills is 29. Is that the order you guys would draft those players in? Mond, Trask, and then Mills?
I think maybe Trask first, because I feel like he has.
I actually prefer Mills out of. I kind of had these guys in a clump so big, right away before the NFL draft. I had them clumped together. So I was going to let landing spot decide. And although Houston doesn't have all the weapons and there's certain, there's just an opportunity there. And they're going to be playing from behind. I think there's a chance that he makes the earliest impact, and maybe you could cash in off of him faster than some of these other options.
Yeah, I think you're right, Dan. I think he's the easier, potential flip this season. I think Trask maybe has a little bit more long term, and then I think Mond is third, just because I don't know, is Kirk Cousins really going to go away? Is Minnesota going to invest in a different quarterback? I don't know. So that one seems like the longest term to me.
It's a unique situation for sure with these, we have these conversations every single year, and now we're starting, fellas, to talk about these developmental quarterbacks that get picked late in the second or early to mid, when in years past we see guys picked in the late first, and we're investing in them as the developmental players. So these guys don't have the same kind of talent as the quarterbacks that we've seen come through over the last few years that it got picked in the 20s in the first round and had to sit behind a veteran that was sure to play for at least a couple more years. Jordan Love, of course, comes to mind. He was picked in the first round, while these guys aren't even just second-round picks, but they're late second or early third-round picks. They don't have the same pedigree as some of the others that we've been developing on our dynasty rosters in these superflex leagues. So I don't want to get sucked into that. It feels like because we've seen some guys create some dynasty value in these leagues after being developed, that everybody's looking for the next big thing, and maybe they get pushed up draft boards, or people start paying a few too many dollars for them in rookie auctions. I'm not willing to go there with this group of quarterbacks, the Trasks and the Mons and all those guys that you mentioned. So it's something to keep aware of if you're into developing a lot of quarterbacks on your roster. These guys don't have that same pedigree and aren't looked at as future stud quarterbacks. They're looked at most likely as developmental guys that could be low-end NFL starters, but most likely career backups. The Buccaneers did add one other player that we certainly need to talk about. It's Jaelon Darden out of North Texas. And we had a couple conversations about him throughout, before and after the NFL draft, guys, because he is a blazer. He's a guy that can stretch the field for sure. The Tampa Bay depth chart, Matt, is full of wide receivers and a lot of talent, guys who have been to a lot of Pro Bowls. Jaelon Darden is going to have a hard time getting on the field. Another group of wide receivers that already has those low-end options as well, with Scotty Miller on the roster, as well as the rookie from last year,
Tyler Johnson.
Thank you, Johnson. There's talent on that roster, and it's going to be hard for Darden to make an immediate impact. Matt, how do you feel about Darden's upside? Is he a stash player because of that speed, or is he most likely trash because he's got so many hills to climb as far as that depth chart goes?
Yeah, he's the type of roster clogger that I'm going to have on my roster. Someone who I love the talent of, speedy slot receiver who could, be a PPR force for you. But like you said, he's just buried with those two receivers and Antonio Brown, presumably taking up that third spot in most cases. So, and Tyler Johnson played well last year when he got his opportunities too. Scotty Miller played pretty well when he got his opportunities. So it's just such a crowded depth chart that it's going to be tough for him to really shine. But like I said, I like the player, and if I have to spend a couple of bucks on a player at the end of an auction, I'd rather spend $2 or $1 on Jaelon Darden than I would Ian Book, for example. So there's something there, I think.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on Darden? He's another guy that is going late or relatively late, I would say, in these rookie drafts. But it seems like in every league I'm in, there's somebody that wants him on his team. So he goes a little bit higher than his ADP when I am watching him go off the board. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, pretty much echo what Matt said. I like Darden as well. I'm also going to probably end up with him on a few of my rosters in that fourth round range, or if you're talking auctions, just for a few bucks. But looking at this depth chart, you're right. I mean, there's 7 wide receivers, if your league is deep enough, that are going to be on a dynasty roster. All the guys you mentioned, and then Justin Watson is still hanging around on rosters as well. So, but if you fast forward a year, Chris Godwin is on the tag. We'll see if he ultimately works out a long-term deal. Antonio Brown is that year-to-year guy. Certainly wouldn't be a surprise if this is his final year with the Bucs or even in the NFL altogether, honestly. So I think if we look more long-term with Darden, there's a road to playing time, which is what makes him a stash.
Yeah, he's another lower end stash for me. He is going off in the 4th and maybe even the 5th round in most leagues, that the ones I look at, but it feels like he goes early in the 4th or maybe even real late with one of the last couple picks in the 3rd in a couple of the single quarterback leagues that I've looked at. So there are fans out there. He is another slight guy. I think he measured in at his pro day at 5'8", 175, right in there. And, we've kind of raised an eyebrow to that size of receiver that have gone a lot higher in the draft. May not matter to a guy that's drafted late in the fourth round, Jaelon Darden to Tampa Bay, but certainly something to consider. I think most likely his career upside is probably as a special teamer using that speed to return punts and kicks. I could certainly see him doing that in those types of leagues where you're benefited from special teams yardage gained. Maybe he's an attractive player late in your rookie draft. A couple more teams to cover here, guys. Let's go to the Carolina Panthers. Ryan, let's start with Terrace Marshall. Picked late in the second round, a little lower than a lot of us expected in the NFL draft, but certainly a guy that many dynasty players are thinking has a lot of upside. But he lands in Carolina. There should be an opportunity on the outside. Is that enough to make him a cash player?
It is for me. I love the pick. I thought it was great value. As we've talked about on here, the three of us and some other friends were together watching the NFL draft, and we just kept seeing these wide receivers come off the board and saying they took him over Terrace Marshall, and we couldn't believe it. And, of course, after the fact, we heard that there were maybe some concerns about his attitude or some injury history. I don't think either of those are enough to have me concerned. I love this offense and really what they've done over the past couple of years and what they did in the NFL draft as well. They lose Curtis Samuel, who was really a similar player to what they already had in DJ Moore and in some ways Robbie Anderson as well. So to add a player that's so different from those two guys in Marshall, I loved it. He's a cash play for me.
Matt, you concur?
He's borderline for me because I just, I like the offense too, but we still have questions about Sam Darnold. Is he going to be a good quarterback, I guess, for fantasy purposes? Is he going to be able to support three fantasy options and I guess really four if we're talking Christian McCaffrey in there too, right? So I have a little bit of questions about his ability to contribute in year one, but he could definitely be a red zone threat with his size. That's the thing that he's going to offer that no other receiver that the Panthers have offers, right? So he could be certainly be a touchdown threat and make his mark that way. But just a lot of a lot of players there and a quarterback that we're not quite sure about yet. So I'm going to call him like a borderline cash player for sure.
Yeah, I think he is too. He qualifies mainly because of that depth chart, and there's going to be an opportunity for him to make an impact early, and it won't take all that much for him to gain dynasty value, especially considering he lost a little bit, right, guys, when he fell in the draft, just a few spots or maybe even a whole round than what a lot of us expected him to go. So I think many of us expected him to be that 7th, 8th, 9th player off the board in rookie drafts, and now he's pushed down just a little farther than that. It feels like that could create an opportunity for him to gain quite a bit of value over the next year if he makes any kind of impact. So that's what makes him a cash player for me and a value in rookie drafts where he's going right now. They continued to add playmakers or potential playmakers to the offense in the third round and fourth round guys. Tight end Tommy Tremble, who's a great blocker, but does have some upside as a pass catcher as well, which is certainly something that Carolina could use. Tight end out of Notre Dame goes in with the 20th pick in the third round. Then Chuba Hubbard in the fourth round, depth player behind McCaffrey at running back. He's out of Oklahoma State. What about these guys, Matt? Do you think that there's any upside here? Do we want to stash these guys, or are we going to throw him in the heap?
Tremble is definitely a stash player, intriguing athletic upside. But again, we have to remember you need to be a top target on your team to be a productive, at least difference-making tight end in fantasy. And it seems like that path is going to be difficult to achieve. But I'm willing to stash just in case. And then Hubbard is definitely trash for me. I just don't see a reason for him to get on the field unless McCaffrey is going to, unless they want to rest him, unless they want to try to keep him healthy, unless he gets hurt. One of those scenarios, that's the only chance that Hubbard's going to have a value.
Ryan, how about you? What do you think on these two guys?
Wow, I'm surprised on the Chuba Hubbard call there from Matt. I was actually debating between cash and stash for him.
Okay.
I mean, you look at the depth chart, and obviously, I mean, he's not winning that starting job anytime soon. but he's winning the second job for sure. I'm confident in that. And with what happened with McCaffrey last year, I can just envision them trying to lower his workload. I mean, we've heard that from them for a couple of years. It hasn't really happened. And then it basically cost him the season last year, and it cost them, I'm sure multiple wins. So now that they're one step closer to actually competing, I think we see Hubbard on the field this year. Now, how much, how many touches a game is that? And how much can he turn that into fantasy value obviously remains to be seen. I do think he's still in the stash category, but where he's being drafted late in the second round, I think he'll look like a pretty good value at that point. And then, of course, Tremble, an ideal stash. Still kind of crowded depth chart there. They still have Ian Thomas. We'll see if he ever lives up to our hopes. I'm kind of doubting it at this point. They are too, because they signed Dan Arnold as well. But we'll wait and see how they use Tremble. Some rumors, some reports that maybe he's like their Kyle Juszczyk, which would be great news for them, great news for him. Not great news for fantasy players.
Yeah, somebody that Carolina Panthers fans will probably love. But, maybe if you're a dynasty player or fantasy player in general, he's just not going to make that much of an impact. That still leaves him as a stash. There's certainly some upside. He has a little bit of that George Kittle out of Iowa vibe. He's got he wasn't used the George Kittle way yet, but maybe they can unlock it. So he's a guy that I'm monitoring for sure. And I'm with you, Ryan, on Hubbard. I was probably a bigger fan of him than both of you combined, maybe before the NFL draft. I don't mind that landing spot. And I feel like a lot of what you said there makes a lot of sense there, Ryan, that he is going to get some opportunity. Maybe it'll be limited right away, but if he were to go down, and by he, of course, I mean Christian McCaffrey, Chuba Hubbard would have that job. And I'm just not willing to put any of these running backs picked in the third or fourth and sometimes even fifth round in a trash category, because as we all know, no running backs last 16 games and now 17 games. I think Hubbard has that backfield for a small stretch this year, and in that offense, he could be very useful. So he's definitely closer to cash than he is trash, but he'll end up being a stash for me as well. The Panthers also added Shi Smith, another late round wide receiver, guy with a little bit of upside. Ryan, is this a guy in deep leagues that we're thinking about, or are we going to pass on him?
I'm probably passing. Again, it's just the depth chart, just too much to overcome there. So I'll let somebody else have him.
Matt, are you going to be the one that's going to take him?
Oh, no. Yeah, he's, a speedy slot receiver, but not great hands. I don't think he can get off of the line well. So, and like Ryan said, the depth chart is pretty daunting. So, nope, he's a trash player.
We saved the Atlanta Falcons for last, guys, because they are a lot of fun to talk about because of one major name. It is, of course, Kyle Pitts, tight end out of Florida. Nobody in their right mind will call him a stash. Nobody, of course, will call him trash either. But go ahead, Matt. Wax poetically about your guy Kyle Pitts for a minute.
I mean, I just feel like there's not really anything left to say about Pitts. Like he's going to see like now it's almost guaranteed he's going to see 20% target share easily, right? Like that has to happen at this point. And I think, again, I think I've mentioned this before, but we have to stop with the tight end designation. It doesn't matter what the designation is. It depends on how they're going to use the player. And it's clear that they're going to use him as a wide receiver in this offense, I think. So, you just can't base the argument just because no rookie tight end has done it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. That just bothers me. So some other stats: Hurst and Gage combined for 197 targets in 2020, and if you add in the 68 targets that Julio got last year, it seems like there's 265 open targets there. Obviously, Gage has got a little bit of a slight bump, I think, and he excelled when down the stretch, especially when Julio missed some time. But I think you're going to see Pitts get 100 targets at least in this offense. So absolute smash cash player. You should be taking him ahead of pretty much every other player in Superflex drafts except for Trevor Lawrence and Trey Lance, I would say.
Ryan, your thoughts on Pitts? Because recently I was I think I was listening to NFL radio on Sirius XM or maybe it was a link that I saw on Twitter, but I was listening to one of the beat writers for Atlanta. I can't remember which one. I think it was D. Orlando Ledbetter, who dug into this offensive coaching staff and how they move around tight ends and how they give opportunity for playmakers, moving them throughout the formation, and really shined a lot of light on what they could potentially do with Kyle Pitts. We all know that he's not your standard tight end that's going to line up at the end of the offensive line, block down for a couple of seconds, then leak out for the catch. While he'll do that, he's going to be used as a weapon and a guy that can stretch the field vertically and horizontally across the middle. So I'm intrigued. I hope, and I think they're going to use him as that type of player, especially with Julio Jones having moved on now. Kyle Pitts seems like that ultimate upside type player, the guy that we're all going to want on our dynasty rosters for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we like him so much. It sounds like Matt has created a new category in this series.
Sure.
He's now
Bitcoin. He's Bitcoin, baby.
He's not just a cash. He's a smash cash,
sure.
which fits perfectly in this series. And I agree. I mean, everything that we can say about Pitts when it comes to the Julio Jones move, it's obviously even more good news for him. If there was any concern about how those three could coexist and share the workload, that's now gone. But I think what Matt said is true, but it's also interesting that they are going to basically use Pitts as a wide receiver. The designation doesn't matter from that standpoint, but it just makes me think we're really undervaluing Hayden Hurst. I mean, the three of us have been doing these eliminator leagues run by our buddy John Bosch. There's 17 teams, and I believe there's 16 rounds. And I mean, that many players, and those are redraft leagues. And Hayden Hurst is hanging around in the 15th, 16th round, like we're just totally throwing him away after a productive season. So if Pitts is really the wide receiver, we love Pitts, we love Calvin Ridley, but Russell Gage and Hayden Hurst are going to get theirs as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're supposed to be talking about cash, stash, and trash as rookies, but maybe there's some potential outside of these guys in that offense specifically. Hayden Hurst will be that guy at the end of the lined up next to the tackle that will still catch the football for sure. The Falcons weren't done. They added 6th-round wide receiver Frank Darby, who there was a little bit of buzz around him leading up to the draft, and certainly a landing spot, Ryan, that could create some opportunity down the road. Is it enough to make him a stash player for you?
It is for me. Darby was a guy I liked coming out of Arizona State. Was a little disappointed he fell as far as he did, but you do have to like the landing spot. You do have to like the landing spot, especially now that Julio is gone. So he definitely feels like one of these project wide receivers. I don't think he's a guy who's going to come in and make an immediate impact, even if the depth chart allows. But yeah, in a larger league, I'm stashing him for sure.
Matt, are you stashing Darby as well?
Yeah, I'm stashing Darby too. And then now there's, presumably there's maybe some opportunity there. Certainly Gage is going to be ahead and probably Zacchaeus as well too, right? But Matt Waldman described Darby as like on the Chris Godwin spectrum in terms of physical talent. So, that's pretty intriguing. And if he does develop, he can play that role that Julio did to some extent, right? So I know that's high praise, but he's a physical route runner. So I actually like stashing him quite a bit.
Yeah, I do as well. The first undrafted free agent that we should really throw into this conversation is running back Javian Hawkins from your neck of the woods down there. Ryan, he went to Louisville. He's an undersized guy and certainly has a little bit of potential when you consider that depth chart in Atlanta with or maybe lack of a depth chart would be a better way to put it. There could be an opportunity for him to make an impact early in his career.
Yeah, I was kind of liking what I saw from Hawkins and his upside in the NFL. And of course, that was before he went undrafted. So that's usually, James Robinson notwithstanding, that's usually really bad news for any player. But if we have to pick a spot for an undrafted rookie running back, it would be Atlanta. They've got Mike Davis. It looks like they're now considering Cordarrelle Patterson a running back. They still have got guys like Quadri Allison hanging around as well. So ultimately, I guess I'm stashing Javian Hawkins. I don't see huge upside even in that offense. I mean, he's just too little, honestly. And but yeah, a stash player just because of the depth chart.
I've tried to grab him in a couple of these kitchen sink leagues late in the auction for $10, $20, and somebody in each league wants him a little bit more than I do. So it seems like there are dynasty players that are willing to spend up a little bit for Javian Hawkins. Matt, are you one of those guys?
I don't think so. I was going to say the same thing, Dan, that there's too much of the hype, right? You'd love to get him as a stash on your roster, but it just seems like someone's always willing to pay more than I think I would necessarily pay for a 180-pound scat pack. There's maybe some PPR upside there, but he's not going to be a reliable asset for fantasy managers. So seeing him go for 10 to 20% more than the minimum in auctions, it's too much for me to pay, I think.
Yeah, it is for me as well, although I still think he qualifies as a stash and a guy that should be on every dynasty roster because there is enough upside right there. With the AFC and NFC South guys, we got to talk about a lot of the best cash players that are out there. A couple of them, of course, in Jacksonville and then another in Atlanta with Kyle Pitts. We have a lot more to come, though. We got to get to the AFC and NFC North next week. Of course, we covered the AFC and NFC East last week. So if you didn't catch that one, go back on your player and play that one. Before we get out of here, guys, anything you're doing in your fantasy leagues right now that some advice for our listeners, something that will that they could be checking in on their leagues right now, Matt?
I think now is like a good time to think about trying to buy some undervalued veterans. We are still, kind of in rookie draft season. And I know we had a big wave right after the NFL draft, but we're still about as far away from the start of the NFL season as we were during the NFL draft, not too much farther out there. So I still think there's a little bit of a window to grab these veterans before teams really start to prepare their roster for the playing season. So I made a deal for Ezekiel Elliott this week for it was like Marquise Brown in a 2022 first, something like that. So I think there are some deals to be had on veteran players out there that can help your team in 2021.
Especially if you're looking to contend for a title right now. Ryan, anything for you to add?
Yeah, I was basically going to say the same thing. We talked about it at the start of the show, just that it's kind of the dead period of the NFL, and you hear and see a lot of people say that. So be the one in your league that's creating the activity, have the conversation, send the trade offers. If everybody feels like nothing's going on, make things happen.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. Be the guy that sends the text or the email or go visit your buddy if you're in the home league or whatever. I got a couple of those reactions this year. Oh, I'm so glad somebody reached out. I haven't heard anything in this league. One of the leagues that we don't do our rookie draft till later on. So if you can be that guy and be the voice that starts the trade talks, it gets a little bit annoying because plenty of times this time of year, you're that guy, you bring up a name and then, oh yeah, I should think about maybe moving him. And then a couple days later, you see in your inbox that the guy traded him to another team. But if you're that guy, you're more likely to get the good player and improve your roster, of course. So those are the things that we're working on right now. Also, of course, the rookie drafts and these rookie auctions. We're excited about our veteran free agency and some of these salary cap leagues as well. There's so many good things happening despite the dead period of the NFL schedule. So that's going to do it for this episode, fellas. For Ryan and Matt, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening to this episode of the DLF Dynasty podcast. We'll catch you again next week.